That the thing about that though is there's no commandment in the New Testament to tell them to do this. There's nothing like that. You see? Now, and that's what I mean. I'm trying to differentiate between what people do of whatever religion they follow and what the religion itself teaches. Now, have Christians done awful things? Of course. They've done some of the worst things. Now, does that mean that's what Christianity teaches? Now, I'm saying right now that Islam does teach a bit of violence and a bit of intolerance based on their own text, based on the words of the hadith, based on the words of the most authoritative theologians. This isn't from my own, I didn't come up with this. This is what they say. Now, does that mean Muslims will do it? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. So we have to always kind of keep a dividing line in our mind about the religions and the people. I can sit here and say Islam teaches X, Y, and Z. I can do that because Islam is a faith and it's objective, and you can sit there and talk about it and say Islam commands this, Islam prohibits this. I can do that with Christianity or Judaism or Buddhism or Hinduism. But I can't do that with the practitioners of these faiths because they, in their own way, can reinterpret it, they can ignore it, they can just not even know about it. So every time I talk, I try to, clearly distinguish between the faith and the people. The people are subjective. They're first and foremost human beings before they are Christians or Muslims or Jews. But the faith is something that, and that's why I don't like a lot of people who try to dissemble and make it sound like it's so hard and there's so many different interpretations. And especially in Islam, it's a very black and white worldview. Under Sharia law, every single act that you and I can commit in this life is classified as being either forbidden, disliked, shouldn't do, but it's okay, permissible, recommended, or obligatory. Every single act. Secular, I said this to someone earlier, they said even secular acts? Yes, that's the whole point, everything. So, and it's clear cut, it's been articulated in Sharia law, there's the precedence. So now, is a Muslim going to necessarily follow that? It's up to him.
Right.
He can go and eat pork and, unless he's in the Middle East and he'll probably get killed. But here he can do it. And
it's interesting about, more than any other faith, I think, Muslims are required to think about the ethical consequences of every action.
Right.
And there's something really beautiful about that. And yet there are contradictions within that, the violence that is has been a plague in Islam from the moment that the Prophet died. The internal violence, I'm saying, the fitna, discord is in Arabic.
Discord,
the split inside the Islamic community, the kind of Islamic civil war that rages actively or subterraneanly almost since its inception. And the number of Muslims who are victims of the hands of al-Qaeda right now, many times more than Americans died on in 9/11. So those kinds of contradictions inside Islam are really at the heart of what has crippled the Muslim world, I think. It's famously a religion that does not have a center of authority. And this can be wonderful, this can be beautiful, that each person is responsible for his own salvation, for his own relationship to God.
Hierarchy.
And yet, the absence of an authority makes it very difficult to talk to Islam. Because that anybody can, like bin Laden, can put it on himself to be the voice of the Muslim people.
But there is, and this is the fourth root of jurisprudence, and this is it's very important, which is called in Arabic ijma, which means consensus. The consensus of the ummah, or more realistically, of the scholars. So whenever, and it usually translates into the consensus of the Islamic theologians, because they're the ones who have a lot of weight in these issues. So a lot of the things, for example, that whole concept of the abode of war and the abode of Islam, that's not something bin Laden came up with. That's something that was fixed with total consensus from all of the scholars, and it was the natural worldview. And see, we can now sit and say, well, that was necessary because it was back then, everyone was hostile, you had to protect yourself, everyone was trying to, but to a Muslim, you really can't do that because it's not that they fixed it. They have studied, and through exegesis of all the sources, the hadith and the Quran, they've come up with, or all those sources have led them to conclude that this has to be the way it is. And since it's based on the divine sources, the Quran and the Sunnah, then it has to apply always. In other words, to say that the abode of Islam and the abode of war is kind of outmoded is the same as to come and tell a Muslim not eating pork is outmoded, because now we know swine isn't as bad as we thought, so why don't you start eating pork? Their answer will be because it commands me not to. So it's the same thing with this dichotomy of abode of war and abode of Islam that have to be at war. It's commanded. It doesn't matter. And you know, there's a verse, for example, that says, fighting is prescribed for you, fighting to spread Islam, though you may dislike it.
Right.
And God knows what's in your interest.
But for centuries, Muslims have been able to negotiate a way of living in peace with their neighbors and not at war with themselves. And so what is the difference now?
The difference now between now and
you know,
then?
if this is an eternal state of affairs in Islam, why is it now that we're seeing this violence justified by the Quran? Why haven't Muslims always been?
They always have. Ever since the 7th century, until the fall of the Ottoman Empire, which was the final authority, sultanate of the Islamic world, jihad was always expanding. I mean, let's not forget, jihad not only took over Saudi Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula, and then after Muhammad died, there was the apostasy wars, which were extremely bloody. Thousands and tens of thousands of Arabs, after Muhammad died, broke away from Islam. And Abu Bakr, the second caliph, they went into major wars, killed them all, and then consolidated Arabia. Then it spread west and east. It spread all through North Africa, Egypt, Libya, Algeria, Morocco, into Spain, into France, till it was beaten at the Battle of Tours. All by the sword.
Small historical coincidence that the date that Islam stopped its expansion was September 11th, 1683.
Well, see, that's what I've always been told was why September 9/11 was picked.
Oh, no, it doesn't have anything to do with the Islamic calendar. You know, it wouldn't correlate. But it's, I think it's fascinating to think that the King of Poland arrived to break the Ottoman siege of the gates of Vienna. And that was the furthest extension of Muslim armies into Europe. And since then, it's been in this long retreat.
Well, that was the first wave, what I just spoke, which is all the way to France and then all the way basically to India. Then you get another wave where the Mongols came and then they converted to Islam, and whether they do it for cynical reasons or not, they continued the expansion, but then they started calling it a jihad. And that's when Russia was, you know, came under the Tartar yoke. That's when the Balkans were taken over with the Ottomans. So it was always like that until Islam became weak. So now in the modern era, the West is much more powerful, technologically at least, and militaristically and economically. So that's why you're not seeing Muslims en masse invading in an offensive jihad. It's not because they've disavowed it and said this is obsolete. It's because they literally cannot do it, except in areas like Sudan and in Darfur, because they're on the same footing.
I often think of, you know, you think about the old Islamic Caliphate in Al-Andalus in Spain. And if you've ever visited there, you're brought to your knees by the beauty of the place, the culture that was so tolerant, and it was a repository for all the translations, the math, everything that
Plato and Aristotle were
they were preserved because of the Muslims there. And bin Laden and Zawahiri occasionally invoke Al-Andalus, the lost Al-Andalus.
Well, to them, Al-Andalus is no less occupied territory than Palestine.
Exactly.
Because it was part of the Ummah, and if it was part of the Ummah once, it's always part of the Ummah. So that.
But I often reflect that if they were standing for a government, a society that was as open and tolerant and progressive, and which worshipped beauty and poetry and learning, as they did in Al-Andalus, who would stand against them? But tragically, it was other Muslims that fought against the caliph there and weakened them, and it was really that caused the Catholic Spain to eventually expel the Muslims and the Jews.
Which we should not also forget, that the Muslims came there by force in the first place. A lot of people tell me, well, look at what the Catholics did to the Muslims. They kicked them out. Well, the Muslims took it by force in the first place. And the same thing with the Crusades. Look at the horrible Crusaders. They went and killed the Muslims. Well, the Muslims came and killed the Christians when it was part of the Byzantine Empire. But I mean, I would not want anything, what I'm saying here, to be misconstrued as I'm saying Islam is totally, a bad thing. I think, like you're saying, it has many great aspects. You know, the high civilization in the Middle Ages, its contributions. You know, it's big on